Welcome back to the Bob Davis Podcast YouTube channel. This is the channel where I talk about recent audio podcasts I've done, and I post a link in the description box on how you can find the audio podcast. It's available on iTunes and Spotify and off the page at the BobDavisPodcasts.com. I do different content after I finish a podcast on YouTube because I usually remember stuff or talk about stuff or have different things happen between doing the audio podcast and doing the video. And I believe that the content really should be different in different mediums, just so it's more interesting. So I am making my soul happy in Montana right now. This last podcast 1144, is entitled "How Do You Make Your Soul Happy?" And it's based on some comments or some writings by Joseph Campbell, who said that at some point in our life, obviously the body fails and you're left with your soul, and that your mission in life is really to make your soul happy. And I arrived at this for a couple of reasons. First of all, I was really sick for almost a week. I had a pretty high fever, 102.9, varying between 99 and 102.9. Believe me, there's a big difference between a 99-degree fever and a 102.9-degree fever. If it gets to be 103, you need to go to the doctor because you could have encephalitis or meningitis or something. And with all the weird bug bites and everything else out in the forest where I live, weird things can happen. So yeah, I'm in Montana. I'm on my way up to Yellowstone, just coming from Little Bighorn. I'm going to talk about that in this video. But I do want to just sort of recap the audio podcast because it got into the post-sickness. I actually feel better after 4 days on my back in Mobile Podcast Command, which is parked right over there, with a fever. And I feel better actually than I did before I got the fever. So I'm just great. Also, I'm just very happy that I'm finally on the road and headed towards, I guess I'm going to go to Arizona. I don't know. I mentioned in the audio podcast, I don't really have a plan. I'm kind of just, I don't want to say I'm meandering. I did want to go to Little Bighorn. I've done that. I'm going to talk about that shortly. So stay tuned, and I'm headed to Yellowstone. I really didn't intend to go to Yellowstone, but it's the path that I'm going to take to get down to Idaho and then on down to Nevada and Arizona. Coming out here was interesting because I went north on 35, which is, around where Route 8 is in western Wisconsin, and I headed up, crossed into Minnesota, and then got on 23 around St. Cloud and kind of angled my way down west to South Dakota, because I thought in my mind I had placed Little Bighorn almost due west from Sioux City. Well, Little Bighorn is in Montana, and it is considerably north. So I went 23 down, and instead of really cutting over at a certain point, going horizontally across South Dakota, I went all the way down to the southeastern corner of South Dakota, and then sort of worked my way west in South Dakota on, I forget the road, doesn't really matter, but it was below 90. I don't like freeways, and I often talk about how I don't like freeways because it's just too frenetic. It's too fast. Too many people running up behind you and trying to pass and the whole 9 yards. Most of the time on the back roads, I'm the only car on the road. So there's really it's completely stress-free. You pass through towns, and it's really great. And I finally started angling up at a certain point. I guess it was Rapid City. Oh yeah, I went up. Amazing trip going up through Deadwood and Lead on up past Rapid City, and then came into Montana and got on 212, and that takes you directly to Little Bighorn, but it's quite a trip. It took me 2 days. I don't usually, my plan when I travel, and I talk about this in the audio podcast, traveling is what makes my soul happy. It's what I want to do. And I talked about in the podcast how, I'm a nomad. I've been doing this now for 4 years. It's hard to believe that we are going to, have the anniversary of my nomad travel sort of date is October 31st. I went out for good, on October 31st, 2020. So this October will be the beginning of the 5th year anniversary. So it's the 4th year anniversary for nomad travel. And I've been kind of going through some changes about whether I want to continue to do this or not. And after being sick and thinking about what makes my soul happy, I can tell you that there might be a lot of things that I haven't fully decided, but I'm going to continue to do nomad travel because I love it and it makes my soul happy. Obviously, the biggest problem with all of this is figuring out how to make enough money to continue to do it, especially if you decide to upgrade your rig or any of those things. Fuel is expensive, and travel, even though you're not paying rent and everything else, can get expensive. So I've been going through some changes with, do I want to keep doing this? What am I going to do if I don't do this? Is there another way to do this? Is there another style of travel? Things like that. And after the 4 days of fever, I came out of it with this, having read this article at some point about making your soul happy, and came to the conclusion that this is really what makes me happy. And once I started moving again, so I left Wisconsin. See, I don't even remember when I left Wisconsin. It was recently, within a week. I think it was Monday or Tuesday. I guess it was Monday. I left Wisconsin, and here I am on Friday. So I'm making this video on Friday, August 30th, and I am in Montana at a campground on 212 on the way up to Yellowstone. I don't know if I'm going to be able to camp in Yellowstone, and it was like 2 o'clock. And I thought, well, I'm just gonna head into this camp because I don't know if I'm gonna be able to camp in Yellowstone, depending on what's going on, and it might just be a pass-through. So this is my little camp. I've been staying in truck stops, which doesn't bother me. I mean, I've been camping all summer. I don't need to worry about staying in a truck stop or anything like that because I've been camping all summer. So I've been staying in truck stops and really enjoying myself in the truck stop world. In the last few days, just about everything makes me happy on the road. What's really cool is before I left, I simplified again. I got rid of a lot of stuff. I sort of reorganized some stuff in the truck. And I just love laying there and looking at all the cabinets and seeing all the things. And everything has a purpose. And everything is just perfectly laid out. And I just stopped in Red Cloud, or what's it called? I can't remember. I can never remember the names of the places that I've been. I suppose I should be a better YouTuber and remember. Red Cloud, I think it's called, or Red Fort or something like that, down here on 212, and could not find stopped in around Billings, and could not find the Laurel. I was in Laurel, Montana at a Walmart. Could not find that butane fuel for jet boils. No matter where I went to, about 3 different places, couldn't find it, and came here to Red Cloud, or whatever it's called, and went to the Ace Hardware, and they have more outfitting stuff, and they had it. So I got 4 cans of that, and I'm pretty happy. So now I literally have everything. I have beans and rice. I have, stew meat. I have some hamburger. And when I finish this video, I'm going to get a little fire going, and I'm going to have my hamburger and taco and cheese. So I have what do you call them? Tortillas. And then I have cheese and meat, which is what a taco is supposed to be. Little Bighorn. I want to take a little bit of time and talk about Little Bighorn. I've always wanted to go there, and I never did. I don't, as a rule, tour battlefields, and I don't, as a rule, do podcasts about that stuff because I've learned that there's some very knowledgeable people, especially on YouTube, and very knowledgeable people doing podcasts about history, and they go to these places. Or they're sort of morose, morbid people, and they like to go to places where people have died. I always wanted to go to Little Bighorn because no matter what I read about Little Bighorn, I found myself just confused about the battle. If you read military history, going to the battleground, there's no substitute for it. It helps you understand what happened and to understand all you've read. Little Bighorn is unique because it's the only battlefield in America, well, it's the only battlefield in the world where the grave markers are where the men fell. So you really can understand what was going on in a little bit better way. If you go to Little Bighorn, they do tours, and there's a tour company there that will take you in a van, and they'll take you on a tour of the battlefield. And what I saw of the ranger talk, as well as the guy that was doing the tours, for some reason they yell, and they're very animated and very emotional. You know, it was time to kill them all, and they get very animated and very emotional, and I find that just overkill. There was a large group of students, and one of the rangers was talking to them, and he was just yelling and emoting like crazy and throwing his arms around. And I just thought, my advice is that if you get the pamphlet, the Little Bighorn pamphlet, there's a panel which takes you through all of the markers, 1 through 12 or 13 of the places that are important. And if you just read that, you're going to have a very good understanding of what was going on in the battle. And then afterward or before, you can watch a bunch of videos about it. Some are really good and some aren't so good. But if you kind of have a sense of history, you can tell which videos are really good. And so there's things that you learn from some of the videos. I don't remember the guys that did the videos, but one of the things I've learned, they made the point that the Indians in these battles, the Plains Indians, really fought independently. They didn't really have a central command because their training was so extensive as hunters. They knew how to hunt. They knew how to stay close to the ground. They understood all of the tactics necessary to fight a battle with human beings versus buffalo or whatever they were hunting, because it's a lot of the same tactics, let's say. What happened at Little Bighorn in a very succinct way is that General Custer, George Armstrong Custer, who was a lieutenant colonel at this point, because it was only in the Civil War that he was given battlefield promotions to be a general. When he went back to the regular army, he was a lieutenant colonel, still young. Was quite arrogant and quite aggressive. And the mistake he made was that he divided his force not twice but 3 times, and then divided it again later when he got into the battle. The thing people would take away from the battlefield that you don't understand when you read about the battle is that this happened over about a 5-mile range. And in Montana, there's these hills. This particular area is kind of prairie, but there's these hills and what I would refer to as valleys or swales. They call them coulees. And the Army and Custer, both Custer and General Crook a few months before, were fond of just attacking Indian villages and trapping the braves and everybody and really committing, in terms of what the Indians think, genocide. I think it's probably to a certain degree debatable, because they were trying to pacify the Indians. Now, here's the thing that's interesting about the whole situation, and I'll get back to the hills. There was a treaty signed with all of the combined Plains Indian tribes. I think it was the Laramie Treaty or the Fort Laramie Treaty, And this granted them the lands in Montana and Wyoming in exchange for peace. And the story goes that there was a depression in the United States, and we were on the gold standard, and General Sherman, who was the Secretary of War at that point, and President Grant decided that the way to get out of the depression would be if they could discover gold. And they had heard there was gold in the Badlands, so they wanted to send somebody out to the Badlands to find the gold. And they sent none other than Custer with the instructions, if you find gold in the Badlands, which was Indian property and an Indian, a Native American sanctuary, because it was considered to be highly spiritual and still is, don't tell anybody, come back to Washington and tell us, and we'll figure out what to do. Well, Custer being Custer, he always, Custer's kind of like a YouTuber. He was constantly writing for magazines and bringing reporters with him. And of course, he went out there, discovered gold in the Badlands, and told everyone, told the media, and then they told everyone. And so suddenly people started coming. The people that were coming out for the gold didn't have any consideration for the vagaries of the Laramie Treaty, and they violated the rules of the treaty and upset the Indians. And then they offered to buy the Badlands from the Indians. They refused because they said, you've already signed a treaty and this is our land. And that caused a huge problem to develop because the Native Americans, the Indians, were trying to protect their land and their way of life. And this activity of attacking villages aggressively and all of the atrocities that they did commit, the U.S. Army troops, caused a lot of problems. And so the Plains Indian decided that they weren't going to put up with it anymore, and Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse decided they were going to unite these Plains Indian tribes and have one last battle and beat the white man. And it just so happened that they had a big, huge camp at Little Bighorn, where they amassed a very large group of warriors. So getting back to the hills, this whole thing started on a Sunday morning. I think it was June 26th or June 25th, and they went out there to find this camp. They'd heard there was a camp there. And when they found the camp, they couldn't see the whole camp. They thought it was just this little portion. And this is where Custer told Major Reno to attack the village. And then he rode forward and down in an effort, because he had considered that they had already seen him and they were getting agitated, and the idea was to attack before they had a chance to do anything about it. And unfortunately, they had 600 men. They'd already divided their force, and the large group of Indians down there numbered somewhere between 2,000, maybe even 3,000 warriors. And not only were they there, but they were also armed with at least 200 repeating rifles, which became very significant because the Army had Springfield breech loaders. You fired one shot, you ejected the bullet, and then you fired again. But if they got hot, you had to clear it with a hunting knife, and that would cause delays in battle. So this whole thing took place over about a 5-mile part of these hills, and there has been much said about General Reno's quote-unquote cowardice in not being able to aid Custer as well as Benteen and the pack mules with all the supplies, which were pretty far back. Well, what happened was Reno went into battle and immediately lost 40% of his force, maybe even more, and had to retreat across the river and barely made it out without being massacred, just like Custer would be in about 90 minutes. So Custer got up there and suddenly realized that this village was huge, this encampment of all of these tribes and their warriors spoiling for a fight was a lot bigger than he thought, and he tried to engage, and then most of the braves and warriors that were engaging Reno 4 or 5 miles away suddenly came up and started to engage Custer. And at this point, Custer started to basically try to displace and retreat and try to reform. He had split his force, and they ended up, of course, at the last stand where they fell. But there are graves all along where you can see that they were pushed and pushed and pushed until they were finally surrounded by these Indians who were highly maneuverable. And instead of firing a Springfield one-shot weapon, which is a standoff weapon, it has quite a range, they were using Henry repeating rifles, which are 45 caliber rifles, and you can get 13 rounds off and reload pretty quick. So the Indians were more maneuverable. They outmaneuvered Custer and then surrounded him and cut him down. It is a fascinating place. The thing about the whole group which Custer had left, Benteen and Reno, they couldn't even see where these guys were. And when you get out on that battlefield and you get on those hills, you begin to see there's no way. They didn't even know where Custer was. They could hear it, but they didn't know where he was. So this guy, Weir, who was a lieutenant, I think, insisted that he be able to go join Custer, and Benteen said, go ahead. And he went up, and he got about as far up as maybe 1.5 miles, 2 miles on the crest of a hill, and there they could see that the battle at this point was over, and Custer was finished, and the Indians were swirling around, and they could see the dust. And then they started to come up to this group with Weir, and he had to retreat. Once you get on the battlefield, you can see what happened. You can see how they're all spread out. At the end of the day, Reno and Benteen dug in and basically used their weapons and their tools effectively and fought the Indians for yet another day. And then finally, the warriors departed and the battle was over. But the point was made. So they had killed General Crook, and they also got rid of Custer, and it was like a shot heard around the world because Custer was so popular and so famous that no one could believe that the 7th Cav had been destroyed. But what happened was he didn't get his intelligence. He spread his force out too much. They probably would have been defeated anyway. They also, I think singularly, left the Gatling guns, which was basically the first machine gun, on the boat that they'd come up the river on. So they didn't have the Gatling guns. If they dug in, maybe they could have got the Indians to attack them, and then they would have had the Gatling guns. But this habit of attacking villages, I think, and being aggressive and trying to cut the Indians down really had a huge impact. It is a huge turning point in U.S. history and in the history of the West, because after that, the tribes dispersed, and over the years, eventually, Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse surrendered, and the rest is history. But it was the one battle where they proved that they could beat the white man, and it's a fascinating place, really fascinating. I think we can do without the histrionics and the waving of the arms around about what happened. And I think if you just read the stuff and do a little reading before you can understand it. But like most battlefields, I had the real pleasure of going to Normandy and to Dog Green, where Omaha Beach, where the United States suffered so many casualties against the Germans. Never could understand it because you couldn't understand the scope of it. And the same is true with Civil War battlefields, especially the Battle of First Bull Run, where Custer distinguished himself for the first time. You can't understand the battle when you read about it, even with someone like Shelby Foote, because you can't understand the distances. And when you understand that these people were 50 feet apart, firing 50 caliber rifles at each other, which would blow your leg off, then you begin to understand, what actually happened in these battles. This is probably one of the first true full maneuver battles, and spread out over a wide distance, that probably happened. I know that's probably not accurate, but it's certainly the first historic battle that it was all maneuver. And with maneuver warfare, if you can outmaneuver your enemy, you win, and that's what the warriors did. and many of them fell, and they are also interred there, and there's monuments to them, and I think it's great that you can see the life lost and the intensity of the battle on both sides. What is not true is that Custer had this famous last stand of bravery. These guys were cut down. They were running. They had their arms up. They were scared to death. And the last battle was actually fought by a lieutenant a few hundred yards away, down in a coulee. That was the last stand. And you see what happened to these guys. They were running away or trying to run away, left and right, and then they were cut down. And so their graves are right there where you can see. Recently also, I just didn't mean to spend this much time on the Custer thing, but also, forensic archaeologists have really done a lot of great work to plot out where the battle actually occurred, and it's fascinating. There's a bunch of YouTube videos about that too. So, making my soul happy is learning about these things. You can read 100 books, but when you go to the battlefield, suddenly it fits together and you begin to understand it. I am fascinated with the history of the West. I'm not really up on it as I am about the Civil War or World War I and World War II or politics, but it is a fascinating period in U.S. history. And, this part of the world only developed about 100 years ago. So, I'm in here in this campground in Montana. I think it's time for dinner. I want to eat while it's still light because I don't want to be attacked by a bear. And then tomorrow I'll head up to Yellowstone. Thank you for staying with me for this whole thing. I hope it's informative. There's many people who know a lot more about that battle than I did, but I tried to get the key things that I think are fairly factual into this video, and then I'll tell you about Yellowstone when I get up there. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to the podcast. There's no discussion about this in the podcast. Most of the podcast is really just about how difficult life is in between 30 and 50, and how at a certain point you start making yourself happy, your soul happy. You can see the difference in my attitude and in my face when I am traveling versus just being static. Even though I was in a beautiful place in the land of sky blue waters right on the lake shore, there's a little stream right up here. I'm very happy to be traveling again, and looking forward to just not really having a plan and heading out and seeing where I want to go. So thanks for listening to the Bob Davis podcasts on YouTube, and also off the page at thebobdavispodcast.com, for subscribing and for donating and for all of those things. For details, in the description box, links to thebobdavispodcast.com, where you can find all the podcasts. And thank you for subscribing and liking and commenting here on YouTube. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of comments about my dumb analysis of the battle, but so be it. Bye-bye.